I've lived in the same neighborhood in Portland, Oregon for 6 years. It's one of those older suburban areas, tree-lined streets, houses built in the 70s, the kind of place where people know their neighbors but respect boundaries. Safe, quiet, boring in the best possible way. My name's Chris, I'm 33, and I work from home as a software engineer. My house is a modest 3-bedroom that I bought when prices were slightly less insane. I live alone, keep to myself mostly, though I'm friendly enough when I run into neighbors at the mailbox or walking my dog, Cooper. The house next door to mine has been occupied by the same guy for as long as I've lived here. His name is Martin Fletcher, he's maybe 60, retired from something or other. Thin, gray-haired, walks with a slight limp. He's pleasant enough, we'd exchange waves, brief conversations about the weather, complaints about the city not trimming the street trees. Nothing deep, just normal neighbor stuff. Martin seemed like the most normal, boring person imaginable. He kept his lawn mowed, his house maintained, his garbage cans tidy. I never heard loud music, never saw suspicious visitors, never had any reason to think anything about him except that he was a quiet retiree living a quiet life. That all changed 4 months ago. It started with a rash of burglaries in our neighborhood. Over the course of about 6 weeks, 11 houses were broken into. The pattern was odd. The burglar only struck during the day, only hit houses where no one was home, and only took small items. No electronics, no jewelry, nothing obviously valuable. According to the neighborhood Facebook group, which I joined specifically to track the burglaries, people were missing things like photo albums, old letters, childhood toys, random documents. One woman posted that the only thing taken from her house was a box of her deceased mother's belongings from the attic. Another guy said his grandfather's military medals were gone, but the TV and laptop were untouched. It was weird, and it was freaking people out. The police were investigating, but they didn't seem to have any leads. No forced entry at most locations. The burglars seemed to be picking locks or finding unlocked doors. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. Whoever was doing this was careful and knew what they were doing. I'll admit I was nervous. I started locking all my windows and doors religiously, something I'd been lazy about before. I even set up a cheap security camera on my front porch, one of those doorbell ones that records motion. 3 weeks into the burglary spree, I was working at my desk. I've got a home office that faces the side yard, giving me a partial view of Martin's house. It was a Tuesday afternoon, around 2 o'clock. I was deep in code when Cooper started barking at the window. I looked up, annoyed, ready to tell him to settle down. That's when I saw Martin in his driveway, getting out of his car with what looked like a large bag. Nothing unusual about that, except for the fact that he seemed nervous, kept looking around, and rushed into his house unusually quickly. I went back to work and thought nothing more of it. But 2 days later, another house was burglarized. And then another 3 days after that. The neighborhood was getting paranoid. People were buying security systems, forming a watch group, posting suspicious activity reports at every little thing. I started paying more attention to Martin. Not because I suspected him specifically, but because I was paying more attention to everything and everyone. That's when I noticed a pattern. Martin left his house almost every weekday around noon. He'd be gone for 2 to 4 hours, then return. Nothing weird about that. Retired people run errands, go to lunch, visit friends. But I noticed he always carried the same large duffel bag when he left, and the bag always looked heavier when he returned. Still, it was a weak observation. Lots of innocent explanations. Maybe he volunteered somewhere. Maybe he went to the gym. Maybe he was taking classes at the community college. But then I saw the schedule. I'd gotten into the habit of tracking the burglaries on a map, just out of curiosity and concern. I plotted each one, along with the date and time. When I laid Martin's comings and goings over that map, yes, I started keeping a log. I was bored, and working from home makes you weird. I noticed something. Almost every burglary occurred on a day when Martin had left his house during his usual time window. It could have been coincidence. Probably was coincidence. But it nagged at me. The responsible thing would have been to call the police with my observation. But I didn't have any real evidence, just a correlation that could have been pure chance. I didn't want to ruin an innocent man's life because I was being paranoid. So I did something stupid. I decided to investigate myself. I started by checking Martin's trash. I know it's creepy. But trash is technically public domain once it hits the curb, right? I waited until garbage day, and after the truck picked up my bins, I quickly sorted through what Martin had put out. Nothing interesting. Normal trash, food waste, junk mail, Amazon boxes. No stolen goods, no suspicious documents, nothing. Next, I tried to be more observant when he left the house. I started working from my living room window on the days I knew he usually went out. I watched him load his car, watched him return. The duffel bag was always with him, and it definitely looked heavier when he came back. 3 weeks into my amateur surveillance, I got my break, though not in the way I expected. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Martin left at his usual time, duffel bag in hand. On a whim, I decided to follow him. I called off my afternoon meetings, grabbed my car keys, and followed at a distance. He drove to a neighborhood about 3 miles away. Not an area that had been hit by the burglaries yet, which was interesting. He parked on a residential street, grabbed his duffel, and walked up to a house. He looked around, making sure no one was watching, and then disappeared into the backyard. I parked a block away and watched. 15 minutes later, he emerged, walking quickly back to his car, the duffel bag now noticeably fuller. He drove away, and I sat there, heart pounding. I'd just watched my neighbor break into someone's house. I should have called the police right then. But I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if he knew the people and had permission to be there? What if there was an innocent explanation? Instead, I went home and checked the neighborhood's social media. Sure enough, by that evening, there was a post from the address where I'd seen Martin. A house had been burglarized that afternoon. The homeowner came home to find her back door unlocked and several boxes of family memorabilia missing from her garage. That's when I knew for certain. My neighbor was the burglar. But I still didn't go to the police. Looking back, I don't know why. Curiosity. Stubbornness. Some misguided idea that I needed absolute proof before accusing someone? Maybe I'd watched too many detective shows and wanted to solve the whole case myself. Whatever the reason, I made another stupid decision. I decided to break into Martin's house to find evidence. I waited for another day when I knew he'd be out on one of his trips. I'd learned his pattern. He left around noon, was gone for at least 2 hours. That gave me a window. I'm not a criminal. I'd never broken into anything in my life. But I knew Martin sometimes left his back door unlocked. I'd seen him come and go through it when working in his yard. I decided to try that first, telling myself that if it was locked, I'd give up on this insane plan. It wasn't locked. My hands were shaking as I pushed open the door and stepped into Martin's kitchen. Cooper was at home, and I'd left him in my backyard. Couldn't risk him barking and giving me away. The house was neat, clean, normal. Kitchen was tidy, living room was furniture that looked like it came from the 90s, bookshelves full of paperbacks and DVDs. Nothing weird. Nothing suspicious. I moved quickly through the main floor, looking for anything that might be stolen goods or evidence of burglaries. Nothing in the spare bedroom, nothing in his office, nothing in the closets. Then I found the basement door. It was in the kitchen, and unlike every other door in the house, this one had a deadbolt on it. Locked from the hallway side, meaning he was keeping something in the basement that he didn't want anyone accessing. I searched his kitchen drawers until I found keys. The third one I tried opened the deadbolt. The basement stairs were dark. I used my phone flashlight and descended slowly, every horror movie I'd ever seen playing in my mind. What if Martin collected more than just stolen memorabilia? What if there was something worse down here? I reached the bottom of the stairs and found the light switch. What I saw made me freeze. The basement was full of boxes. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all neatly labeled and organized on metal shelving units that lined every wall. But it wasn't just random stolen goods, it was organized like an archive. I moved closer and read the labels. Each box had a name, an address, and a date. Morrison Family 1432 Oak Street EST 1952. Chen Household 2156 Maple Drive EST 1968. Patterson Collection 892 Birch Lane EST 1975. I opened one of the boxes. Inside were photograph albums, letters, old documents, exactly the kind of things that had been reported stolen. But they were carefully preserved, organized, protected in archival quality containers. This wasn't a normal burglary operation. This was something else entirely. I pulled out my phone and started photographing everything: the boxes, the labels, the contents. I must have taken 100 photos. Then I heard a car door slam outside. Panic hit me like ice water. Martin was home early. I ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time, but I heard the front door opening as I reached the top. No time to go out the back. I did the only thing I could think of. I dove into the coat closet near the front door and pulled it shut, praying he hadn't seen me. I heard Martin walk past, humming to himself. Heard him go into the kitchen. Heard the basement door open. I was trapped. If he'd locked the back door when he came in, I couldn't leave that way. If I tried to go out the front, he might hear me. And if he came back upstairs and decided to hang up a coat? I stood in that closet for what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, barely breathing, my phone clutched in my hand. I could hear Martin moving around in the basement, the sound of boxes being shifted. Finally, I heard him come back upstairs. Heard him walk toward the living room, away from the closet. Heard the TV turn on. This was my chance. As quietly as I could, I opened the closet door and peered out. The living room was around the corner. I couldn't see Martin, but I could hear the TV. The front door was 6 feet away. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could, eased open the front door, slipped out, and closed it softly behind me. Then I walked quickly, not running, that would look suspicious, back to my own house. Once inside, I locked every door and window and sat down, my heart racing, and looked through the photos I'd taken. What the hell was Martin doing? Why was he stealing people's family memorabilia and archiving it like this? What was the point? I finally did what I should have done weeks earlier. I called the police. 2 detectives came to my house that evening. I told them everything: my suspicions, my surveillance, the tale I'd done, and yes, my illegal entry into Martin's house. I showed them the photos. They were skeptical at first, especially about how I'd obtained the evidence, but the photos were damning. They said they'd investigate and warned me to stay away from Martin and to absolutely not break into anyone's house ever again. The next morning, I watched from my window as police cars pulled up to Martin's house. They had a search warrant. I saw them bring Martin out in handcuffs, saw them carry box after box out of his basement, loading them into a van. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded. The burglar had been caught, living right among us. People were horrified, vindicated, grateful. But I was still confused. The why was eating at me. I'd caught a burglar, sure, but what was his motive? It clearly wasn't money. He hadn't sold anything, hadn't pawned anything, had just archived it all. A week later, one of the detectives called me. "You available to meet? I think you'd want to hear this." We met at a coffee shop. Detective Sarah Chen, no relation to the Chen family whose box I'd seen in Martin's basement, bought me a coffee and sat down with a thick file folder. "Martin Fletcher has been charged with 11 counts of burglary," she said. "He's confessed to all of them. But his lawyer is pushing for a psychiatric evaluation, and honestly, after talking to him, I think it might be warranted." "What do you mean? Did you know Martin used to work as a city archivist?" I shook my head. 30 years at the Portland City Archives. He was responsible for preserving historical documents, photographs, records, essentially maintaining the city's collective memory. He was apparently very good at his job, very dedicated. Okay. He retired 8 years ago. According to him, it was devastating. His whole identity was wrapped up in preservation, in protecting history. And then he wasn't doing that anymore. Detective Chen opened the file and pulled out a document, a statement from Martin. About 2 years ago, he read an article about how much family history gets lost when people die. How photo albums end up in estate sales, how letters get thrown away, how the details of ordinary people's lives just disappear. It became an obsession for him. She slid the statement across to me. He decided he needed to save these things. To preserve the history of ordinary families before it was lost forever. So he started identifying houses where elderly people had recently died or moved away. He'd check obituaries, real estate listings, public records. Then he'd break in and take family archives. Not valuable stuff, just historical materials. I read Martin's statement. His handwriting was neat, precise. Someone needs to preserve these memories. Families don't understand their value. They throw away their history, Sell it for nothing at garage sales, let it rot in attics. I was saving it. Cataloging it. Keeping it safe for future generations who might want to know about their ancestors, about how ordinary people lived in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. I know it was wrong to take things that didn't belong to me, but I couldn't stand by and watch history be destroyed. It went on for pages, a detailed explanation of his methodology, his cataloging system, his preservation techniques. He'd treated the stolen goods like museum pieces. He's mentally ill, I said. Detective Chen nodded. That's what the psychiatric evaluation will determine. He knew what he was doing was illegal, but he genuinely believed he was doing important work. Saving history, as he puts it. What happens now? The DA is considering the psychiatric angle. Martin's lawyer is arguing for treatment rather than prison. Given his age, his clean record, the nonviolent nature of the crimes, and the obvious mental health component, honestly, he might get probation and mandatory treatment rather than jail time. And the stuff he stole? We're returning it all to the rightful owners. Though interestingly, a few families have said they'd actually forgotten they had some of this stuff, didn't realize it was valuable. One woman told me Martin's theft actually saved boxes of photos from her grandmother that were about to be thrown out during an estate sale. She's grateful, in a weird way. I sat back, processing all this. My neighbor wasn't a criminal mastermind or offense or someone profiting from crime. He was a mentally ill man who'd become so obsessed with preservation that he'd resorted to theft to fulfill what he saw as a historical mission. One more thing, Detective Chen said. Martin wants to talk to you. To me? Why? He knows you're the one who turned him in. He says he's not angry, that he understands. But he wants to explain himself. You don't have to, obviously, but... Against my better judgment, I said yes. They arranged a meeting at the jail where Martin was being held pending his psychiatric evaluation. I sat across from him in a visitation room, a phone connecting us through glass. He looked smaller than I remembered, older. But his eyes were clear, intelligent, sad. Thank you for coming, he said. I don't know why I'm here, I admitted. I wanted you to know I don't blame you for calling the police. You did the right thing. I broke the law. I invaded people's homes. I took things that didn't belong to me. I understand that. Then why did you do it? He was quiet for a long moment. Have you ever felt like you had a purpose, something you were meant to do, and then that purpose was taken away from you? Maybe. I don't know. I spent my entire adult life preserving history. Making sure that important documents, photographs, records that they survived for future generations. It was my calling. And then I retired, and suddenly I had nothing. No purpose, no mission. He leaned forward. Do you know how much history disappears every single day? How many families throw away boxes of photos because no one remembers who the people in them are? How many love letters end up in dumpsters? How many documents that tell the story of ordinary lives just vanish? So you decided to steal them. I decided to save them, he corrected quietly. I know that sounds like rationalization, and maybe it is. But Chris, I have boxes in that basement documenting families that go back generations. The Morrison family box contains letters from World War II, photographs from the 1920s, a diary from a woman who lived through the Depression. The Chen family has documentation of their immigration from China in the 60s, their struggles building a business. These are irreplaceable windows into history. But they weren't yours to take. I know. His voice cracked slightly. I know that. But I also know that the Morrison house was being cleared out for sale. I watched them throw 3 boxes of old junk into a dumpster. I pulled those boxes out after they left. Was that theft? Technically, yes. But was it also preservation? I didn't know what to say to that. The Chen family, he continued, their daughter was sorting through her parents' house after they moved to assisted living. She was going to donate everything to Goodwill. I know because I heard her tell a friend on the phone. Those archives would have ended up in a thrift store, probably thrown away when no one bought them. Instead, they're catalogued, preserved, safe. You're asking me to feel sorry for you. No, he said firmly. I'm asking you to understand me. There's a difference. I broke the law. I violated people's privacy. I deserve consequences. But I also saved things that mattered, things that tell the story of our community, our time, our ordinary lives. The families you stole from, they were traumatized. They felt violated. I know. And that haunts me. He looked down at his hands. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I only took things I thought they'd forgotten about, things that seemed neglected. But you're right, it doesn't matter what I thought. I hurt people, made them feel unsafe in their own homes. That's inexcusable. We sat in silence for a moment. What happens to the archives? I asked. The things you collected? They're being returned to the families. Though my lawyer tells me several families have expressed interest in donating some items to the actual city archives once they get them back. Apparently seeing their family history catalogued and preserved has given them a new appreciation for it. There was a strange irony in that. I wanted to tell you something else, Martin said. I knew you were watching me. About 3 weeks before you called the police, I noticed you paying attention to my comings and goings. I figured someone would catch on eventually. You knew. I'm observant. It was my job for 3 decades. And honestly, part of me was relieved. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. It had become a compulsion. Someone needed to stop me, and I couldn't stop myself. You could have turned yourself in. I tried. 3 times I drove to the police station, ready to confess. But each time I'd think about all the history still out there, disappearing every day, and I'd turn around. I told myself just one more house, one more family's story to save. But there was always one more. He looked at me directly. You did me a favor, Chris. You stopped me from destroying my own life further. Yes, I'm facing charges now, yes, I might go to prison. But at least it's over. The compulsion is broken. Someone else is in control now. Detective Chen had mentioned mental illness, but sitting across from Martin, I could see it clearly. This wasn't greed or malice, this was obsession, compulsion, a mind that had latched onto an idea and couldn't let go. He was rational enough to know what he was doing was wrong, but not rational enough to stop doing it. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing. Just understanding, maybe. And to thank you. You caught me, but you also freed me. He paused. And to ask one thing, some of those archives, the ones being returned to families, if any of them decide to donate materials to the city archives, would you check on them? Make sure they're properly preserved? Make sure the history isn't lost. It was a strange request, but I found myself nodding. Okay. Thank you. The guard indicated our time was up. As I stood to leave, Martin said one more thing. I know I'm the villain in this story. The criminal, the thief, the creep who broke into people's homes. And that's fair, that's what I am. But I hope someday people might also see me as someone who cared about preserving their stories, even if I went about it in the most wrong way possible. I left without responding. I didn't know what to say to that. The aftermath was complicated. Martin was ultimately sentenced to 5 years of probation with mandatory psychiatric treatment. The judge acknowledged his mental health issues while also emphasizing the seriousness of his crimes. He was ordered to continue seeing a psychiatrist, forbidden from entering anyone else's property without explicit permission, and required to do 500 hours of community service. The community service, ironically, was assigned to the city archives working under supervision to properly catalog historical materials. Martin was back to doing what he loved, but this time legally and with oversight. The families whose homes had been burglarized had mixed reactions. Some were furious, wanted Martin in prison, felt that mental illness was no excuse. Others were more forgiving, especially once they saw how carefully their family materials had been preserved. The Patterson family, whose box I'd photographed in Martin's basement, actually invited him to their house, with police supervision, to go through the materials he'd taken and explain the historical significance of various items. Mrs. Patterson told a local news station that while she didn't condone the theft, she was grateful that someone recognized the value of her family's history. Several families did end up donating portions of their archives to the city, just as Martin had hoped. The city archives created a new collection, Ordinary Lives, a documentation of Portland families 1920-2020. Martin's obsessive cataloging became the foundation for a legitimate historical project. As for me, I became known in the neighborhood as the guy who caught the burglar. People treated me like a hero, which felt deeply uncomfortable. I hadn't been heroic, I'd been nosy, paranoid, and had committed my own crime by breaking into Martin's house. Detective Chen told me unofficially that they were overlooking my breaking and entering given that it had led to solving multiple burglaries, but she made it very clear I was lucky and should never, ever do anything like that again. I promised her I wouldn't. My relationship with Martin is weird now. He still lives next door, couldn't afford to move, and his probation required him to stay in the area anyway. We see each other at the mailbox, in our yards. We don't talk much, but there's an understanding between us. About a month after his sentencing, he knocked on my door. He handed me a box. "What's this?" I asked. "Materials from your family. I never got to your house, but I did research on families in the neighborhood. I found some things through public archives, old photos, documents. I made copies for you. Properly cited, all legally obtained. I thought you might want them." I opened the box. Inside were photographs of my grandparents I'd never seen, copies of documents about my great-grandparents' immigration to Oregon in the 1950s, newspaper clippings about my grandfather's small business. All legally obtained from public archives and genealogical databases. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to. You helped me, even though it didn't feel like help at the time. This is me saying thank you the only way I know how, by preserving your history." I accepted the box. We stood awkwardly for a moment. "I'm getting help," he said. "Real help. The psychiatrist says I have obsessive-compulsive disorder, maybe some other things. We're working on it." "That's good, Martin." "Yeah." He paused. "I'm sorry for what I did. To everyone. But especially to you, for putting you in that position, for making you feel unsafe in your own neighborhood. I wasn't the one you burgled. No, but I made you lose trust in your neighbor. That's a theft too, just a different kind." He walked back to his house, and I went inside with my box of family history. I spent that evening going through the materials Martin had compiled. Photos of grandparents as young people, documents telling stories I'd never heard. My grandfather had apparently been a decorated veteran. My grandmother had written poetry that was published in local papers in the 1960s. I'd never known any of this. Martin was right about one thing: we lose our history so easily. Not through malice, just through neglect and time. 6 months have passed since all this happened. Life has mostly returned to normal, though the neighborhood is definitely more security conscious now. People lock their doors, install cameras, join watch groups. The story made local news, then faded away. Martin became that guy who used to steal stuff and then eventually just became my neighbor again. I've actually started volunteering at the city archives one Saturday a month. I tell myself it's because I'm interested in local history, which is true. But it's also because I want to keep the promise I made to Martin to make sure that the materials families donated are properly cared for. Martin works there too, on his community service hours. We're not friends, exactly, but we're something. Two guys who care about preservation, I guess. He's teaching me about archival techniques, proper storage, cataloging systems. He's good at what he does. He always was. The psychiatric treatment seems to be helping him. He's less obsessive, more grounded. He's joined a support group for people with OCD. He's rebuilding his life under the constraints of probation and public judgment. One Saturday at the archives, we were cataloging a collection that had been donated, photos from the 1970s showing the neighborhood we both live in. Different houses, different cars, different people, but the same streets. "This is what I was trying to save," Martin said quietly, holding up a photo of a family barbecue from 1978. "Look at this. These people lived full lives, had families, had joys and struggles. And without documentation like this, they'd just be gone. Forgotten. Like they never existed. You could have saved history legally," I pointed out. "You had the skills, the knowledge. You could have started a nonprofit, asked families to donate materials, worked with the city. I know that now. But when you're in the grip of a compulsion, rational thought doesn't apply. All I could see was history disappearing, and all I could think was that I had to save it, by any means necessary. The end justified the means, or so I told myself." He carefully placed the photo in an archival sleeve. "That's what mental illness does. It narrows your vision until you can only see one thing, and everything else, laws, ethics, other people's feelings, become secondary. It took getting arrested, charged, forced into treatment to break that tunnel vision. Do you still feel the compulsion? Every day. I see an estate sale sign and I want to knock on the door and offer to preserve whatever they're throwing away. I read an obituary and I want to contact the family and ask if I can catalog their loved one's belongings. The difference now is that I recognize it as compulsion, not calling. And I've learned tools to manage it. A family came in while we were working, the Morrison family, whose World War II letters I'd seen in Martin's basement. They were donating their collection to the archives now, and they wanted Martin to help them catalog it properly. "We've talked to a therapist about this," Mrs. Morrison said, seeing my uncertain look. "We're not excusing what he did, but we also recognize that he preserved something we might have lost. We can be angry about the method while appreciating the result." Martin worked with them for 2 hours, carefully documenting each letter, each photo, providing historical context, showing them the significance of what they had. They left with a complete inventory of their family history and a new appreciation for it. "That's how it should have been done," Martin told me after they left. "With permission, with cooperation, with respect. I robbed myself of the joy of working with families, of being trusted. I threw away my integrity for the sake of my obsession. It's a weird situation to be in, working alongside the man I caught committing multiple felonies, having semi-philosophical conversations about history and mental illness and redemption. But here we are." Detective Chen stopped by the archives one day while I was volunteering. She pulled me aside. "How's it going working with Martin?" "Fine, actually. He's good at this. And he seems to be genuinely getting help." "Good. Because I need to tell you something." She looked uncomfortable. "After we arrested Martin, we started looking into unsolved burglaries in other neighborhoods, other cities. Similar patterns, only taking family archives, no forced entry, careful selection of targets. And we found 3 other people doing essentially the same thing. One in Seattle, one in Eugene, one in Sacramento. All former archivists or librarians or historians. All obsessed with preservation. All with diagnosed OCD or related disorders. All breaking into homes to save family history." I felt cold. "You're saying Martin wasn't unique?" "I'm saying he was part of a pattern we didn't know existed. There's apparently a whole subset of people so obsessed with preservation that they've turned to theft. We've started calling them history hoarders. It's a recognized phenomenon in psychiatric literature now. That's terrifying." "It is. But it's also sad. These are people whose love of history has been twisted by mental illness into something criminal. They need help, not just punishment. That's why the dough went easier on Martin than we initially expected. He's a test case for how to handle this kind of crime." She paused. "Your instinct to investigate rather than immediately calling us might have actually helped. If you'd called us after just seeing him come home with a full duffel bag, we might not have had enough for a warrant. Your photos of the basement archive gave us what we needed. Though again, never break into someone's house to gather evidence. Trust me, I learned that lesson." "Good. Because Martin's lawyer tried to get the evidence thrown out since you obtained it illegally. It was a close call." After she left, I thought about what she'd said. Martin wasn't a lone criminal, he was part of a larger pattern, people whose good intentions had been corrupted by obsession and mental illness. It made me think about all the ways good people can do bad things when they stop seeing the difference between their intentions and their actions. Martin intended to preserve history, a noble goal. But his methods were theft, violation, crime. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, as they say. A year has passed now since I first discovered Martin's crimes. The neighborhood has mostly moved on. The burglar next door story has been replaced by new neighborhood dramas, a dispute over tree trimming, a controversy about short-term rentals, the usual suburban stuff. Martin has completed his community service hours but continues to volunteer at the archives. His probation continues. He attends therapy weekly. He's started a blog about ethical historical preservation, warning others with similar obsessive tendencies about the dangers of letting passion become compulsion. Some families still won't forgive him, understandably so. Others have come to accept him as a cautionary tale about mental illness and good intentions gone wrong. As for me, I've learned some things through this experience. 1. Your neighbors are always more complicated than they appear. The boring retiree next door might be running a criminal operation, or battling mental illness, or living a life so different from what you imagine that you'd never guess the truth. 2. The line between heroism and nosiness is thin and mostly defined by outcome. If Martin had been innocent, I'd be the creep who stalked and broke into his house. Because he was guilty, I'm the guy who solved the case. But my actions were the same either way. 3. Crime isn't always about malice or greed. Sometimes it's about mental illness, obsession, good intentions twisted into harmful actions. That doesn't excuse it, but it complicates it. 4. History matters. Martin was right about that, even if he was wrong about everything else. The stories of ordinary lives, the documents and photos and letters that tell us who we were, they're worth preserving. Just not the way he did it. And 5. Forgiveness is complicated. I've forgiven Martin for the stress and weirdness he brought into my life. Some of the families have forgiven him. Others never will. And all of those responses are valid. I still live next door to a criminal. We still wave at each other in the morning. We still have occasional conversations at the property line. But now those conversations are informed by knowledge, by understanding, by a shared experience of crisis and consequence. Last week, Martin knocked on my door again. He handed me another box. More family history? I asked. No. These are for you to donate if you want. Inside were carefully preserved newspapers from the day I was born, from major events in my lifetime, from the years I've lived in this house. All legally obtained, all properly archived. Your history is being made now, he said. Someday someone might want to know what it was like to live through these times, in this place. I thought you might want to preserve it. I accepted the box. Thank you, Martin. Thank you for stopping me. I mean that. I was destroying my life, and you stopped me. He walked back to his house, and I took the box inside. Later that evening, I added to it, printed out the photos I'd taken of Martin's archive basement, the news articles about his arrest, my own notes from that strange time. Someday, maybe decades from now, someone might want to know the story. The burglar next door who stole history in order to save it. The neighbor who caught him. The complicated aftermath. It's a strange story, but it's ours. It's history now. And unlike Martin, I'm preserving it the right way, with consent, with honesty, with respect for everyone involved. But I understand him a little better now. History is precious. The lives we live, the stories we tell, the evidence that we existed, it matters. Not everyone who recognizes that will cross the line into criminality like Martin did. But I get the impulse, the fear of loss, the desire to hold onto something permanent in a world where everything fades. I just hope I never let that impulse overwhelm my judgment the way it overwhelmed his. I still work at the archives one Saturday a month. Still see Martin there. Still live next door to him. And probably will for years to come. It's not the story I expected when I moved into this quiet neighborhood. But it's the story I got. And like all the stories in the archives, the love letters from World War II, the immigration documents, the family photos, it's messy and complicated and very, very human.